It was November 2011. At that time, most people had never heard of Edward Snowden or Malaysian Airlines or even Gangnam Style, especially because it had not come out yet. Occupy Wall Street was only a small movement that was only a few weeks old and a few hundred people strong, long before now when it became one of the most powerful memes in the world. At the time, there were people alive like Patrice O'Neill, Joe Frazier, and Heavy D, all of whom passed away in November 2011. Also still alive were Kim Jong-il, Joe Paterno, Whitney Houston, and Dave Coulier. Okay, Dave Coulier is still alive, but for a second you were like, holy shit, what happened to Uncle Joey? As far as football goes, Andrew Luck was at Stanford, Russell Wilson was at Wisconsin, and Jameis Winston was at Hueytown High School. We know exactly where he was because of the detailed surveillance records. In the NFL, though, Pete Carroll's record with the Seattle Seahawks in mid-November was 9-15 after a 10-point loss to the Dallas Cowboys. Imagine that. There was a time when Pete Carroll was a failure and Tim Tebow was a hero. Well, Tim Tebow might still be a hero, to me at least, but things have certainly changed for Carroll and the Seahawks. Since that loss to the Dallas Cowboys, Pete Carroll is 41-15 in the regular season. He has lost as many games since mid-November as he had in his first year and a half with the Seahawks. 47-17 if you include the playoffs. He has won a Super Bowl, 2 NFC championships, and hasn't lost a game by more than 9 points in that entire 64-game span. Before a 30-21 loss to the San Diego Chargers last season, Seattle had gone 46 games in a row without losing by more than 7 points, a strong indication of how hard it is to beat a team if you can't pull away by more than one score when the game is on the line. And that streak stands as an NFL record, 46 games. It's one game longer than a 45-game streak by Matt Flynn and the Packers. Okay, but Matt Flynn was a part of that streak, just as Tavares Jackson is currently a part of the 64-game streak of active streak of games in which the Seahawks have not lost by more than 9 points, a record so much longer than second place that it would take at least 3 years for the Patriots, who have the second longest active streak at 15 games, to beat it. And that would require Tom Brady playing until he's like 50, I think. Russell Wilson alone has taken part in a run of games longer than any other team in the NFL history, even if you did throw out the Tavares here with the bath salt water. And yes, bath salts would have been a great reference if this was still 2011. Welcome to Reel on the Field Gulls. I'm Kenneth Arthur, and with me, as always, is co-host Danny Kelly. How are you, Danny?
I'm not too bad. How are you doing, Kenny?
I'm doing great. Coming up in a little bit, we're going to talk to Jacson Bevens, Field Gulls writer. But first, let me ask you, Danny, what do you think about that 64-game streak? I wrote about it the other day. You read it, of course, because you read everything that I write, and you're like, wow, that's so good. So what do you think of the 64-game streak? What's your opinion? Does it matter? Does it not matter? Is it incredible? Is it amazing?
I think like people will say it's an arbitrary number. They haven't lost by more than 9 in however many years it's been, 3 years, 4 years. But I think the overall theme of it is that the Seahawks are extremely competitive every week and extremely consistent every week. To go back 64 games and realize that they were in every single one of those games along the way. They were in a situation where they could win every one of those games. It's pretty amazing, and it just speaks to, the overall competitiveness of their roster, the overall competitiveness of their defense. Their defense has kept them in games for 4 years running, and I just think people will say what they want to say about the actual statistic, and that's fine, whatever. But what it does tell you is the Seahawks are consistently really, really good, and they've been that way for 64 games running, and I think it tells you a lot. I think it's actually a really important stat, even though people will poo-poo it for sort of being arbitrary in terms of the number, but.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's a huge deal, and it just really tells you. I think it points to their dominance over the last since Pete Carroll has taken over. Not necessarily their first 2 seasons, but I just think it points to the competitiveness that the team that they've put together and how deep they are. Because there's so many variables in the NFL, and if you look at some of the people that have been blown out over the last couple of years, and the really good teams are getting blown out at times.
Right.
So I just think it points to a lot of like their philosophy, like in terms of limiting their ball control and like they like run fewer plays than almost any team in the NFL. They're very much ball control, clock control. I think what they do is they try and like mitigate so many of those variables by doing their philosophy and doing their style of play that I think it's a perfect example of the type of, I guess, style that Pete Carroll is trying to create, where they really believe they can win close games, and the number
Yeah.
one goal is to keep every game close, and they think they can win it. They think they can win the vast majority of those games, and they think they
And
have.
yeah, and when you think about the few times that it looked like maybe that they were gonna get blown out, the times when things weren't looking so good, whatever it is, that fourth quarter, there isn't a better. You got to say that from what we've seen, every time it seems like, oh God, this first half is awful, which happens pretty often, especially for a team
Yeah.
that's won so many games. But that second half, it's like they just know Pete Carroll adjusts perfectly, and I guess that fourth quarter, it's just a matter of when you have that defense, because the offense is going to wear down usually probably before a defense, and so. Well, and it just depends how the game's going. But I think that if as long as your defense is healthy in the fourth quarter, which is they've managed to build a rotation and a depth where they don't have, the same defensive lineman in there for, more than 40 snaps or whatever, where they're switching it up. And, they've built it to the point where it's like those games against the Falcons or those games against the Packers where it's like, and when you combine that with the fact that Russell Wilson really doesn't seem to give a shit, like if he's losing, like he gives a shit if he's losing, but he's gonna play the same. And there's something that like when you speak to the intangibles, there's something about Russell Wilson and just the way he changes his demeanor when it's like, okay, well we're down, 20 points in the fourth quarter, but whatever, let's just go out and score a touchdown and see what happens. And they've managed to close it up quite a bit. Yeah, and I think that also in that middle of the 2011, that loss to the Dallas Cowboys, then when you see the Seahawks under Pete Carroll, there are turning points where it's like, okay, 2011 in the middle of the season, they seemed to get better in the second half. They went 5-3 compared to 2-6 in the first half, and then in 2012, same thing. They won their last 6 games of the year. That was another turning point. And then they started blowing those teams out. The things that doesn't happen to them when they're winning 58-0 against the Cardinals and blowing out the Bills and the 49ers, and that was a turning point. And then in 2013, that's when they'd really come together and everything like that. But it's certainly one of the turning points. It started with the 2010 draft, their first draft. You wrote about that for SB Nation. In the 2010 draft, the Seahawks got Russell Okung, and the big one was, of course, Earl Thomas. Did you have any other thoughts about, like, could they have done that any better? Was that the best possible thing that they could have done? I don't think you can improve on Earl Thomas at 14, but
Yeah.
Russell Okung, he's been fine. And did you have any other additional thoughts to the Seahawks draft that year?
Well, I mean, I just think they started out their tenure in Seattle knowing they wanted to get a left tackle because left tackle is such an important position. They got Russell Okung, and he hasn't been the all-pro that you were hoping for, and he's been injured more than you'd want, but he's a solid left tackle, and, that's what you're looking for. He's been a starter for his whole career. He's never been benched. So, I think in that sense, that was a hit. And then obviously getting Earl Thomas and Cam Chancellor in the same draft, that like put them on the road to being a dominant defensive team, and when you hit on players like that where you can control them for their first 4 years, and Earl Thomas, who sort of is the linchpin of their defense, he can, like, Earl Thomas's speed and range allows this. He essentially plays. He's 2 guys on the field, so the Seahawks almost play with like 12 defenders because Earl Thomas can cover so much space. His speed and range allows the Seahawks to put Cam Chancellor up in the box, or have him drop in zones, and it's just so hard to throw against the Seahawks because they essentially have 12 guys on defense with Earl Thomas's speed. They don't challenge the middle of the field. They do not challenge seam passes or post passes. That's Earl's domain, and and that allows the Seahawks to run their zone drops into the other areas
Yeah,
and
there's been 80 possible regular season games since 2010, and Earl
mhm.
Thomas is one of the only guys in the entire draft from that year to play in 80 games. And
Wow.
there's a, another guys, almost none of the other guys in the first round. It's Earl Thomas, Tyson Alualu, and Kyle Wilson. So he's the only one to play
Jeez.
80 games and also be really good. But not
Yeah.
many guys have played in all 80 games, but there's a danger that he's not going to be ready for the start of the season. And talking about how important he is, have you put in any thought as far as what would happen if Earl Thomas wasn't there for week 1? Who's going to be playing, and how big of a difference is it going to make to the rest of the defense?
Well, I mean, obviously, if he's not playing, that will be a huge deal. But at this point, to me, I'm not worried about it because I think he will play. Um, barring some weird situation where he can't make it back to the field, I think he's the Seahawks. Well, they'll have to figure something out, whether it's having Cam Chancellor play in the middle of the field while he's out, or having, I guess, Steven Terrell take over. It's really weird. I think they'll probably try to address that situation in the draft, and at this point, I don't even want to think about what the defense will look like. They might have to play a cover 2. You just don't really know.
Right.
So
And let's
looks like Jackson's online. So
yeah, I was just gonna say let's bring in our guest for the day. I'd like to say first of all that Jackson and I hosted many hangouts, video hangouts in our past, and I'm so glad that we're doing a podcast because I feel like it kind of evens the field. You don't have to look at his face, and you don't have to look at my face and compare the two. So it works well for me. Jackson, how are you?
Well, there's nothing. It's the balance is flipped in your favor because you got me lapped on personality. I'm doing good, man.
Awesome. Were you sitting over there salivating, wanting to say anything at all about the streak or the 2000?
Oh, yeah, I was actually. I've got some drool in my beard. The thing that stands out to me about that is, okay, yeah, maybe 9 is an arbitrary number because, we want to say the double digits thing. We love round numbers and whatever. It's impressive no matter how you look at it. But there's only been one game, and it was, the Chargers game at the beginning of last year that has been by more than a touchdown. And that's not an arbitrary number. That means one possession. 63 of those 64 games have been decided by 7 points or less. And that is what's so amazing to me. It means that no matter what, at some point, the Seahawks have, even in those losses, had the ball with a chance to tie or win at the end of the game. And that's amazing. I mean, the Patriots, Super Bowl champions, the second longest streak, whatever, they lost by 4 touchdowns to the Chiefs this past season. Like, it just happens. It happens. The game is still played by human beings who have off days. And sometimes when you have multiple important players have off days, you lose bad because everyone in the NFL is good at football. That hasn't happened to the Seahawks. That is absolutely incredible to me. So, yeah, poo-poo it at 9 if you want, but think about it this way. 63 of their last 64 games, they've either won or been within one score. That to me is what's so amazing.
Well, also, and if you think about it as well, like during that streak, when they really started to turn it on, they're averaging about 15 or 16 points allowed. So it's like when you're only averaging that many points over 3-4 years, it's hard to win by more than a touchdown, and that's what makes them so good, right? It's the fact that they can hold every game close, and then they've got a quarterback and a running back, and that's the other cool thing about the Seahawks in the fourth quarter when they're losing is that they stick to the run game. They'll be like, what, we can still gain, 8 yards on this run, and we won't worry too much about the clock. We're going to be fine. They've gotten into some clock troubles in Pete Carroll's tenure, but that's the other thing is that they don't have to rely on a pass and being able to and risk a turnover.
Well, we've seen it too. The Seahawks struggle a lot passing when the other teams know that they're going to pass. And I think that they know that. I don't think they have any misconceptions about who they are. They have receivers that can get open against single coverage or can find a soft spot in a typical 4 or 5 man zone, but they don't have at least until their big trade, they've never had the guy where it's like, you know what, they're bracketing this guy, I'm going to throw it to him anyway.
Yeah.
And, that's why you see teams like the Lions or the Bengals or the Bears or the Patriots who can fling it around 40 times if they fall behind early because they trust that, Brandon Marshall or A.J. Green or Calvin Johnson or Rob Gronkowski is going to go out and get that football. So what Danny said, I really like, how they try and mitigate all of the extra factors that are in a football game, and their style is very conducive to keeping themselves in games. And that same style that keeps games lower scoring and close, defense and running and ball control, is the exact same thing that allows them to then lengthen their own leads once they have it. It's a very suffocating choke-out style of football that they play. And what's amazing about it is most teams that are that way have to get ahead early in order to win, because if they fall behind by 2 scores, it's over. They don't have the firepower. But like you said, Kenny, they stick to their guns and believe that that Falcons game in the playoffs a couple years back that they ended up losing, but they were down 27-7 and came back and took the lead with 30 seconds left, and they did it mostly by running the football. They didn't panic. They didn't lose control of the game plan. And it's one thing to believe that philosophically. It's an entire thing separate to go and Toby really likes the point on that.
Yeah.
Is another thing to actually, hey, we're down 3 touchdowns in a playoff game, and we're going to stick with it anyway. I mean, that's true conviction. It's not just a philosophy.
Look at the Packers game. I mean, the NFC Championship game. It's like Marshawn Lynch scored the huge touchdown from, I don't know, the 20-something yard line. It was a pretty long run.
Yeah, they were down by 2 scores late. I'll admit, that's the only game in the last 4 years that I've been like, oh, Seahawks, you know what, after that last interception, I was like, yeah, it's just not going to happen. They had a good run, whatever. Yeah. That's the only time I've felt that in 4 years, which is insane in its own right. I mean, even fans of college teams, the good ones, don't go 4 years without that feeling. And they even won that game. I mean, it really is remarkable.
And this is the NFL, and they're playing the 49ers. They're playing, good teams. They're not like, there's been even criticisms about the quarterbacks that they'll play for a stretch of games, and it's like, well, fine, if you want to focus on those games where they gave up 2 touchdowns over 6 games, if they played Mark Sanchez and Ryan Lindley, fine, do that. But also go out and look at every game that Aaron Rodgers has played against him in the last 3 years, or Peyton Manning, or Tom Brady. It wasn't, Drew Brees was dominated. That's the whole thing, is they have such a good defense, and they haven't played an easy schedule. They've played, and it's the NFL where you should never have an easy schedule, unless.
Yeah, no such thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, to me, to wrap up the whole sort of thing, I just think with the Seahawks style where they want to limit the amount of variables that can happen in any certain game, plus their style of physicality where Pete Carroll has literally said, we want to beat the hell out of you if we can. I think it's honestly just they want to play longer. They want to play better for longer than you. And it's really hard to play the Seahawks because they're so physical on defense and offense. They stick to their dukes, in terms of running the football. Everyone on their team has to be physical, and I just think teams wear down, and that's why you've seen them win so many close games, and why Pete Carroll seems perfectly content to have a 7-score game all the time. You remember the time when Marshawn Lynch was like, "Can we score more points now?" That's. I mean, he was joking or being weird or quirky or whatever, but he was being serious. Pete Carroll seems perfectly freaking content to have a 7-point lead.
Right.
Yes.
Because he trusts his defense, he trusts the system, he trusts the whole philosophy, and the vast majority of the time, obviously, you look at the record the Seahawks have over the last couple of years, and it bears out. It's he just believes that they can beat you down until the mid to late fourth quarter, and we've seen Seahawks run away with so many games in the mid to late fourth quarter just because teams give up.
And I think that to make it to the NFL, pretty much everyone in the NFL is willing to give and take some big hits. They've been a part of it through high school, college, the pros. They're a part of it, and that's fine. In that sense, the Seahawks aren't any different. What's amazing is how they can continue to level that blow. You know, you look at the Carolina Panthers playoff game against Seattle, and Cam Chancellor in one game had enough hits to fill most safeties' season-long highlight reel. It is so relentless. I mean, it's late in the game, and he is body bagging Mike Tolbert, who essentially ended a couple of careers earlier in the season with contacts. It's the ability to, after the adrenaline of the beginning of the game has worn off and everyone's willing to lock horns and whatever, it's when you're tired and you're sore and you've had your hand crunched between helmets and your teeth are rattling and everything hurts and it's cold, to still be willing to size up Marshawn Lynch, to still be willing to size up Bobby Wagner, Cam Chancellor, whoever. And it's everywhere. It's not like there's one or two guys that you have to avoid if you don't feel like being physical anymore. It's relentless, and it's got to be so hard to do that for 60 minutes.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, and let's, just to the point of how good that they are, it's not the best. I don't think it's the best 3-year run in NFL history, but just crazy that the Seahawks have lost 12 games regular season in the last 3 years, and the Jets, Jaguars, Titans, Raiders, Redskins, and Bucks all lost 12 or more games last year. So for them to go 12 losses, that's how many times that we've really been like, oh shit, they lost in the last 3 years. And the fact that, as Jackson also said, only one of those was more than a touchdown, and you know that's just it's insane. And some of the times that you feel like, oh, this sucks, we're gonna lose, like the Patriots in the regular season in 2012, where it's like they just getting their asses kicked all day. But at the end of the day, when they can keep it that close, you don't always lose those games, as was also evidenced in the NFC Championship.
You know, I think another thing that's really important to that point, Kenny, and it's a good one, is, you know, on top of the willingness to be physical, one thing that Seattle does, and I believe his name is Michael Gervais, he's kind of their like spiritual, psychological guide. He talks about how no one moment is ever bigger than another, and how treat every present moment with your full everything that you have. And I think that because for as long as sports are going to be played by human beings, pressure is going to matter, and fatigue is going to matter, and you get the sense that to the Seahawks, that's not really the case, at least to the same degree, you know, and so their record in primetime games is impeccable. Their record in playoff games is unbelievable. You know, they beat Hall of Fame quarterbacks regularly because I truly believe that they go out there and every play is as important as the next play, and they're able to be present and to give that play everything they have and not see it as a bigger one than something else. And that's really valuable too, because the biggest limitation on our body isn't physics, it's our own mind. And if you can free up your mind to in turn free up your body, that's what you see with Seattle. It's that, you know, Carroll talks about it in Win Forever. It's that getting to a point where you're so convicted in your ability to fill your role that you let go of everything and just do it. And that's an amazing thing.
And that's like, to me, that's the whole philosophy around it. That's like the glue. You know, it's like Pete Carroll's been successful for the last 15 years now, like on a crazy level too. You know, like his teams at USC were dominant for a long time. You know, and obviously he had to start over with the Seahawks a little bit, but they're now to that point where they seem like the USC teams of old, where they're like, I mean, they're just outclassing a lot of teams, and they can compete with anybody, obviously. So
yeah. So I feel like if anyone listened to this that was like maybe not a Seahawks fan, it would sound like the biggest Seahawks circle jerk in history. By the way, they're good. So we get a little bit of this time to ourselves. Jackson, as far as the Seahawks offseason, you've seen all the moves they've made, the ones they haven't made. Do you have any sort of general thoughts or first impressions on the additions? Obviously, Jimmy Graham is the biggest one, and the losses, such as Byron.
They got Jimmy Graham?
Yeah, let me check. Yep.
That doesn't seem fair.
I think that's probably what opposing GMs were saying when that happened.
Yeah, I have been following, and I don't do a whole lot of off-season work for the site, but I do follow what the team's doing, and the one piece I've put up was after the Jimmy Graham trade, and for me at first when I heard that they got Jimmy Graham, obviously my thought was no way. I mean, he's one of my favorite players, and then I was like, okay, well, what did it cost? And I saw the cost, and at first there's a bit of sticker shock.
Yeah.
Max Unger, who's probably been our best offensive lineman in the Pete Carroll era, and a first-round pick. And I thought, oh, man, that's an awful lot. And then I went into writing the article sort of on the fence about it, and I tried to flesh out every major objection to the Jimmy Graham trade that I could find. And I came up with 4, and I tried to address each of them. And if you guys will indulge me for a minute, I'll go through them. The first one was the money. I know that he signed a huge contract the year before, and I was worried, okay, how much is this going to affect the ability to re-sign Wagner, structure Wilson's contract, sign other pieces, etc. But the Saints have swallowed the bulk of it already. The Seahawks are only going to pay him $8 million this year. It's guaranteed. Next year it's $9 million. None of it's guaranteed. The year after that it's $10 million. None of it's guaranteed. If this doesn't work out, they can cut ties. But it gives them the one thing that they've been missing. I mean, the Seahawks are like that, 25,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, and you finally get every piece in position except for the middle of the face. You're missing an eye on the face, and
Right.
and they found it potentially with Jimmy Graham. You look at every single thing with their offense, defense, special teams, besides having that one receiver that you trust to go win a battle on a 50-50 ball, they've addressed it all outside of maybe consistent pass blocking. So for them to get Jimmy Graham in, he's not an $8 million true talent, $12 or $13 million player, and they likely will never pay him that in a season. So he is a bargain at their, I think, biggest position of need. Another objection was, and I didn't address this, I guess a fifth objection was, people say he's a tight end, but he's not very good at blocking. Listen, bitches, he gets 160 targets a season, okay? You cannot run. Well, I mean, the guy has literally been running 35 routes a game for the last few years. I mean, we're talking about 600 routes a season. You're not going to establish yourself as a great blocker when you're running that many routes. And it's like Matt Nichols said on the Cigar Thoughts broadcast, complaining about his ability, Jimmy Graham's blocking is like complaining that Kate Upton isn't a great cook. That's not why you're buying Sports Illustrated. So I think that the money thing, I still think they're getting a real discount there. The next thing was the loss of Max Unger. That was the big one for me. That was my initial gut check. Shoot, man, the offensive line has already struggled. What are they going to do? So I went and I looked at the differences in Seattle's performance with and without Max Unger over the last 2 years. First of all, a lot of concerns. Jimmy Graham's had some foot problems, some shoulder problems, whatever. He's missed 1 game in the last 3 years. Max Unger has missed 13 in the last 2. I didn't realize it had been that many games. In games without Max Unger, they've only scored 2 fewer points than they did with Max Unger. That's significant, but they also didn't have Jimmy Graham, which I think Kenny was the one who pointed out. They also didn't have Jimmy Graham in those games.
Right.
And the other thing is, there was a large stretch of those games this past year where the defenses they played in a row were Carolina and San Francisco and St. Louis and Arizona. These are really good defenses that may on their own have accounted for that. They've been the best rushing team in the NFL for the last 2 years, despite missing Max Unger for 40% of their games. They have been productive without him. They've shown that they can win without him. They're 10-3 in those 13 games. They won the last 8 in a row.
Amen.
There hasn't been any objective drop-off without Max Unger, so I'm okay with that one. Other objection was the loss of the draft pick. First-round draft picks are exciting. We love to get excited about it. It makes the draft fun, et cetera, et cetera. But by trading that pick, I think that the way that John Schneider and company see it is that's freeing up some guaranteed money. First-round draft picks are exciting, and you get team control for a few years and whatever. But Jimmy Graham is the guy you get down on your knees and pray that your draft pick turns into, especially at pick 31. You know, that's money they're saving. That's a roster spot. That's not a risk. He's actually projectable. Danny, I think I saw that. That's something that you tweeted, is that Jimmy Graham isn't a prospect with great skills and size. He's someone that you can actually get a sense of what he's produced, what he can produce going forward, and his quantity is tangible enough that you can build around it. You know, and to go back to the money thing, not to mention the money that's freed up by trading Max Unger. I think that frees up almost $4 million, plus what they're saving on the draft pick. So, you know, I don't mind missing out on the draft pick if, you know, your thought is, and this is the fourth objection, that, you know, Seattle's a team that wants to draft and develop and build things in-house, the Packer way that Schneider comes from, etc. Yeah, that's great. But what if they're just not good at drafting wide receivers? I mean, go back and look at all of the receiving and tight end options that they've picked up since Carroll and Schneider got in there. And it's a bunch of misses and some, maybe because I'm a fan, I'll say they're okay Jermaine Kearse types, but they've missed. The best guy that they've picked is in Detroit now. You know, there's no real reason 5 years in to be confident in their ability to find an NFL quality star receiver, especially picking at the late end of the first round. So I don't really see that as that much of a missed opportunity. So at the end of it, it's like check in favor of the Seahawks on this trade in every single category as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting, like, I was looking at some of the other tight ends that have been traded, and it's just fun. I don't know, like, what this means, but it's just funny that the Panthers traded a third-round pick to get Greg Olsen, who's a top 5 tight end, but he turned into that when they came to Carolina, and the Falcons traded an undisclosed 2009 draft pick. I'm assuming it was disclosed at some point for Tony Gonzalez. So definitely the price has gone up a little bit, but Jimmy Graham is also. You don't think that you're going to use a first-round pick this year and end up with Jimmy Graham. So sometimes it seems like, you know, like they just had that documentary come out called Going Clear about Scientology and how people go into Scientology like, well, I'm going to go in there and make fun of these people. And then they come out and they're like, I'm going to join Scientology. And it's like they have these mind tricks or whatever. And it just seems like John Schneider totally went Going Clear on the Saints, because I don't understand how. I feel like they called like, oh yeah, we're trading a bunch of our players, and they're like offering Kenny Stills, and they're like, well, what about Jimmy Graham? And then it just slowly turns from like, well, no, that's not going to happen, to where is Jimmy Graham? We just traded him to the Seahawks? What the fuck? But then, like, you know, that they wake up, because that's my opinion. Definitely, I think the first round pick, you're not going to get Jimmy Graham at 31. If anybody could trade a first-round pick for Jimmy Graham and just straight up, I feel like it would be a top 10 pick. You're not going to get a guy in the top 10. You'd be lucky if you end up with Jimmy Graham from a top 10 pick. The whole thing with Max Unger to me is just like, no offense to Max Unger, he's a really nice guy, he's a really good center, and he could be completely healthy next year and so on, but centers just have their value at a limit, and it's capped. And other teams get by with centers that they just drafted or picked up off the street, and you can't find Jimmy Graham.
To that point, you know, the foremost authority on centerhood that I know is Matt Nichols, who's joined us on the Cigar Thoughts podcast a couple times, and he was an all-conference center in college, won a national championship at PLU, and Danny can attest from texts that he gets from Matt during games. He doesn't watch the same game that the rest of us watch. And he looks specifically at offensive line play and can break it down on a level that is well beyond my acumen. And he watches the center position specifically, and he feels really confident with how Seattle played post-Max Unger. And if he's confident with it, and he's pretty hypercritical of offensive line play, then I'm all right with it. I'm in no position to say he's wrong.
Yeah, and to me, I totally agree about Matt, and like he does text me really, really interesting insights every time. You know, he like picks out something that you would never notice, and like you're like, oh wow, holy crap! Like he'll be like, go watch so and so on this play, and it's like, you know, and you're like, oh wow, I never would have even noticed that, but he just destroyed that guy or whatever, you know. going back to Jimmy Graham real quick, I think on one of our video casts back in the day, or sometime recently, I talked about how Dez Bryant, I think the Seahawks and the Cowboys ran approximately the same amount of times this last year. Everyone talks about, Seattle's passing volume offense is so small, like you can't get the numbers, blah, blah, blah. Go look at Dez Bryant's numbers in that offense. They ran the ball approximately the same amount of times as the Seahawks, and Dez Bryant had like 14 touchdowns.
That's a great point.
And to me, honestly, I think Jimmy Graham, it would not surprise me if Jimmy Graham had 10-plus touchdowns in this season. And, obviously there's a lot of variables that go into it. But, and Jackson brought it up, it's like the Seahawks have not had a true touchdown maker at the receiver position. They have touchdown maker in Marshawn Lynch. And Russell Wilson obviously is a touchdown maker in himself, but they just don't have. They hadn't had a guy like that you can literally just like Jackson said, even if he's bracketed, you can throw it up to him, he's going to get it. And
so here's something that's really interesting along those lines, Danny, is the Seahawks are elite at getting into the red zone. They are really an average or below team when it comes to scoring once they're in the red zone, which seems crazy, right? Like you think that, once you're down close to the goal line, it's the teams that can run that do it. Except for the Seahawks have to face a 7-8 man box once they're inside the 5-yard line. And, it's because teams know there's only two real options for the Seahawks. It's the guy taking the snap and the guy he hands it off to. So, and they start out really close to each other. You bring in a guy like Jimmy Graham, you cannot, there's not a defender in the NFL that is going to, maybe Richard Sherman, who's going to single cover Jimmy Graham in the red zone successfully. So he is automatically pulling a guy away from Marshawn Lynch and Russell Wilson. Marshawn Lynch has been statistically on runs inside the 5 way below NFL average for scoring touchdowns, which seems crazy, but it's true. I mean, from the 1-yard line, he's like actually one of the lowest percentage running backs in converting those into touchdowns since he came to Seattle. So there is a real need for turning those 3-pointers into touchdowns.
Yeah.
How many times have you seen them try and run a pass play inside the 10-yard line, and if that first look's not there, it's
just to throw it away,
running around until he throws it away or something. It's not a designed play. They don't have options in the red zone in the passing game, and Jimmy Graham changes everything. You either double team Jimmy Graham and lose the ability to stop Lynch on the run, or you keep them in there and you count on some cornerback
the best
Graham on a jump ball.
Yeah. And to that point, I watched all of Jimmy Graham's targets recently in 2014 or whatever. And, it's like you'd think, he's a touchdown scorer. He had 10 touchdowns. He's scored more touchdowns than all but Dez Bryant and Marshawn Lynch over the last, couple of years. That was a great stat that Kenny found. His touchdowns aren't, like, super, like, crazy or, like, holy cow, look at that. Like, oh, my God, look at that play he made. It's literally like he runs a simple little route, they throw it up to him, and he catches it. It's like the most easy routes, too. It's like he motions left to right. He runs a little, like, hook, and they just throw it up, like, 7 feet high or 8 feet high, and he goes up and gets it. Because he's so good at boxing out, you have to respect him over the top because they can still run the fade. And he's just got such a long catch radius, and his body control is amazing. Like, there's a lot of guys that are 6'6" in the NFL that can run really fast, but they're not Jimmy Graham. They're not guys that can like jump up, spin in the air, find the ball, catch it, bring it in. He's a physical freak.
He is, and the thing is, it's not just this crazy athleticism. When the ball hits his hands, it doesn't leave. It doesn't matter if the defender has a hand in there or brings his arm crashing down on Graham's wrists or whatever. I mean, I'm sure you saw this when you watched all of his targets, is that when he catches the ball contested, it stays in his grip all the way through the catch.
Yeah.
Every time.
He's a really, really good receiver. And I think people, as they watch him more and kind of learn about him more, because I think a lot of Seattle fans, like, their reference point is like him against the Seahawks. And it's like, okay, the Seahawks have a historically great pass defense. Like, you could argue they're the greatest pass defense of all time.
Yes, okay. You can.
So
everyone's impression of Jimmy Graham is like what he's done against the Seahawks. It's like if that was the case for like say Drew Brees, would you not want Drew Brees as your quarterback? Or Aaron Rodgers, you don't want Aaron Rodgers as your quarterback because he's not played well against the Seahawks. Like, give me a break. Go watch his whole season. Jimmy Graham is running over dudes. He's hurdling guys. He's stiff-arming dudes. He's a really, really, really good target in the mid-range. Like, a lot of his, he's not like catching 85 balls downfield 25 yards. Like, a lot of his catches are like on 3rd and 4, 3rd and 3, 3rd and 5. That's like what the Seahawks really need. It's like these little routes where he like goes out, posts up, and they just throw it to him, and he gets a first down. He's running these little hook routes or just like hitches or whatever.
You know, the most exciting thing about the addition of Jimmy Graham is for me is for 3 years we have seen Russell Wilson limited to throws where his receiver is open and has a step. Yeah. Because Doug Baldwin and Jermaine Kearse and whoever else that they've run out there are not guys that can establish position at the first down marker and then win a challenged ball. It has to be on the run. It has to be on a rollout. It has to be something where a small quarterback has a line of sight to small receivers. And, yeah, maybe that's overplayed, but that's the physics of the situation. With Jimmy Graham, you have a guy that can run to one step beyond the first down marker, and that is a first down. You've seen them try that with Luke Wilson. Luke Wilson, for all his athleticism, has spatulas for hands. If that ball's coming in hot from 8 yards away, he's not catching it. There is so much value in Jimmy Graham. We are about to see a side of Russell Wilson that we've never been able to see before. We've never seen him throw fade routes in the end zone because they don't have anyone to do it to. We've never seen him throw stick routes from inside the pocket because he's had no one to do it to. There is an entire part of an arsenal that an NFL QB needs to have that we haven't even seen Wilson brush off yet because he hasn't had the weapons to do it with. Like, most quarterbacks are known commodities by the end of their third year. That might not be the case for Russell Wilson.
Yeah. And I think that's the other thing, just to finish off that point, is like, people are talking about Russell Wilson's big payday coming up, and like, has he really earned it, and blah blah blah. I'm like, he's played 3 seasons. Like, he's still a player that has a lot of room to grow, and think back to Aaron Rodgers. He didn't even play a like meaningful down until his 4th season. So there's a lot he still could get better at. There's a side he could still improve at and develop, and this last year was interesting in that he ran a lot, and he's not always probably going to run that much. So there's just it's a whole. This is kind of getting off subject, but to get back to Jimmy Graham, like, it's definitely a whole new dynamic for this season that will be interesting to watch.
It'll be interesting. He's got Russell Wilson has 72 career passing touchdowns, and out of those, Golden State is still Golden State. The Golden Tate Warrior had caught 12 of those. That's the most that anyone has ever caught from Russell Wilson. Sidney Rice is third with 9.
That is insane that his leading touchdown receiver has 12.
Yep, and so you cut out basically 3 of his top 4 of his 3-year career are gone. Golden Tate, Sidney Rice, and Zach Miller, and they only combined for 29, and then Doug Baldwin had 10. But he was clearly starting to edge towards tight ends as the season went on. His 2 last touchdown passes of the season went to Luke Wilson. Luke Wilson caught another one in the playoffs. And Tony Moeaki and Cooper Helfet. Cooper Helfet caught 2, Moeaki caught 1, and those were all in the second half of the year. And I think that when you really look at it, there's definitely that problem that they have as far as, passing it inside. It feels like, and it can all come down to the Super Bowl play being a microcosm for a bigger problem, which is that they don't know what the fuck to do when they're inside the 5-yard line except hand it off to Marshawn Lynch, and then when that doesn't work, which it's not a foolproof plan, and everybody knows it, because there isn't really any other option until now. With Jimmy Graham, it's a fucking problem for other teams to be sitting there. Like, I could definitely see this one adjustment, this one change to the team being the kind that brings them up from 26 points a game to 30 points a game to really make them kind of that fucking juggernaut from actually just being, if they can have the same type of defense, I don't see why they couldn't be, I'm just going to say best team in the NFL. I'm not going to go beyond that, but Yeah, it should be interesting, and we should probably give some time to another part of the game. We could talk a little bit about the defense. That's the other big, huge change is that Byron Maxwell is gone, replaced for now with Kerry Williams, maybe Will Blackman, and then the draft ahead. Byron Maxwell. It's hard to play that other position for a number of reasons. On the field, Richard Sherman is typically, he's covering the left side. Do I have that right? Left side?
I don't really know how people even refer to it, whether it's stage right or actual right. You know what I mean? But
I think when I was read the other day on Football Outsiders, they were calling it the left side. So.
He lines up on the defensive left.
Okay, so
right. The offensive right.
Right, exactly. That's where he's at. So yeah, if he's always on that side, typically, I saw the numbers of who he covers. Sometimes he does cover a number one. Often he covers a number two. So it's really hard for the position Maxwell is in to be able to know that this is the side you're covering, and they think that you're weaker than Sherman, so we're going to put our better player on you. And he came away looking pretty good. He wasn't perfect, but he played that position well. Other people say because of the three players around him, it doesn't really matter who you plug in there. So, Jackson, how do you feel right now about the corner position? Opposite of Sherman is the Legion of Boom, about to be exposed.
I'm sorry, it cut out. It sounded like you were asking me this question. Were you asking me this question?
Yes.
Okay. I think that there might be some concern at the beginning of the year, depending on the overall health of, quite literally the top 4 or 5 guys on their depth chart. I do like Kerry Williams quite a bit more than a lot of folks do. To judge him by the success of the Philadelphia Eagles secondary at large is really misplaced blame, I think, and a misappropriation of criticism, because he was covering receivers, number one receivers with a team with no safety help and no pass rush. And, there's just not many guys who are going to be successful that way. And he actually held his own okay. And he was, I thought, very good in Baltimore. But, with Earl Thomas, Cam Chancellor, Richard Sherman, Thurl Simon, Jeremy Lane all out, what you might see is some discord at the beginning of the season, and that's going to be worrisome. And if that's the case, and we'll all freak out and end of an era and this and that, just like we did this year with all the Percy mess and the inability to beat teams like the Rams and the Chargers, which we thought would be easy wins early on, and all that stuff. But in reality, the Seahawks are a team with an identity, and there are so few of those in the NFL that those guys are going to be healthy. None of them are really, to my knowledge, maybe Lane, at risk of missing all of next season. And if you have an identity and you have health going into that final month of the season, that's what you want as a chance for getting to the Super Bowl. And there's no reason to think the Seahawks might, there's no reason to think the Seahawks won't have that. I think that, Seattle is a team that might lose an extra. Thomas or Cam Chancellor, Richard Sherman, or Thurl Simon aren't quite themselves, lose a game or two that they would have otherwise won. But it's not going to be something that keeps them out of the playoffs. And if the Seattle Seahawks make the playoffs, I'm telling you right now, they are the last team anybody wants to play in the playoffs, and probably will be for a few more years. So, there might be some consternation at the beginning of next season. But in reality, as far as, we're at a point as fans, and they're at a point at an organization where it is Super Bowl championship or bust. And every team says it, but so few teams are really in a position to believe it. And the Seahawks are in that position right now. They are in a true championship window. And as much as those injuries suck, it's not something that has me really concerned with their end goal for next year.
It sounds like we are touching a little bit here on the window and the big picture, and something else. And earlier Danny talked about Russell Wilson's contract, which just that story won't go away until it becomes a thing. And do you guys? Sometimes I feel like great players. I think the great players, they become great for a while, and then they move into the next phase of their career, and then they have to be great again with a different set of skills, with a different set of players. Like, you have to reinvent yourself every 5 years, or so. And we've seen Tom Brady do that. We've seen, Drew Brees do that. We've seen these guys change as the game changes around them. Russell Wilson is off to a phenomenal 3-year start, but some would say maybe this is it. This is the peak of the mountain. So if you're just looking at statistics, Dan Marino was off to an amazing 3-year start that was never matched before or since, and the rest of his stats for the rest of his career, while he was still Dan Marino, just weren't like those eye-popping kind of stats. So let's start with Danny, just your quick thoughts. Do you think that it's possible that Russell Wilson is going to sign the contract at a time where he's already done his best things, or do you think that he's got it in him to continue on and be just as good, if not better? Do you think you did kind of say that maybe you thought he was going to improve?
Well, just to interrupt real quick, I told Jackson that I would let him go at 3:10, so I'm going to have to let him.
I got to get back to work.
Oh, great. Well, thank you for joining us, Jackson.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on, man. This is a great podcast, and not just because I'm on it.
Thanks, man.
Appreciate it.
All right, have a good one, guys.
All right, so anyway, to your point, Kenny, or to your question, yeah, I mean, I think, like you were saying, I think eventually Wilson is not going to be able to be so reliant on his ability to run, and the read option is not always going to be so dominant because Marshawn Lynch is, on his last year or last 2 years, whatever it ends up being. Their sort of combination together in the read option is really unique, and I think that combination won't be something they can lean on forever. And so I think he's going to have to evolve. He's going to have to, improve in certain areas, and you see that as the year goes on. A lot of times, like we talked about, towards the end of the year, like he was starting to get the ball out a lot quicker, and they made that a huge emphasis for him, and he really did improve in it. And that was just over a course of a couple of games. And I think if that's one of their focuses during the off season, having him get the ball out quicker, less like scrambling around and less craziness, I think that will be reflected in his stats and the overall efficiency of the offense. I think he's still going to do his scramble around like a crazy guy thing, and that's going to be like a part of his identity still.
I think the most important thing with any of these quarterbacks is definitely a lot of them, it comes down to the brain. It comes down to the way that they can read a defense, how prepared they are, and because it's like even the most simple things that don't necessarily reflect directly on him, where it's like, if history has taught us anything, Russell Wilson's going to play 10 years longer than Marshawn Lynch. So when Marshawn Lynch is gone, he has to become a different player because so much of his game is based around the game of having Marshawn Lynch and that style of running back. And, then it's going to change again. Having Jimmy Graham, it's going to change. It's like if you look at Tom Brady just winning a Super Bowl, he's in the last phase of his career, but he's still great. But he's not nearly the same player that he was 5 years ago. When he was throwing 50 touchdowns, that was a different player. And then, when during like that loss to the Chiefs or even last year, and people are, actually asking Belichick if he's going to play Jimmy Garoppolo or whatever.
Yeah, that was awesome.
And but Tom Brady, I don't think that he has very much arm strength, at least not as much as he used to. I think he's got an amazing arm, in different ways, but also knows how to play, and is just so much different than he was earlier in his career. And when you look at Russell Wilson, there are comparisons to be made to Tom Brady in a way from his first 3 years with the Patriots, 4 years, where it was like, oh yeah, the Patriots have a championship defense, and we need a guy that's gonna, you can call it a game manager, but I think obviously Russell Wilson is more than a game manager because he takes over games. Like there are plenty of times where the defense isn't doing that great, but Russell Wilson throws for 300 yards and rushes for 100, and he still does things like that. And people say that he's a game manager or that he's just a product of a system, where it's like
everybody is
it over.
Everybody is the product of a system. I hate to tell you.
Absolutely.
So I don't know. Yeah, I totally agree. It's like his game might change, it might evolve, but he has a skill set in my mind to do that. I'm not worried about him like all of a sudden falling off and like not being able to do anything, because he's got the attributes for a quarterback that you really want. He's accurate, he's got a strong arm, he's he takes care of the football. He makes good decisions for the most part. You know, he's one of the guys that has turned the ball over the least in, you know, his first several years. You know, he's a hard worker. He's solid off the field. There's all these variables that, you know, go into quarterbacking, that he just does, none of that stuff worries me, and so that's all, you know, that's all good. Obviously, he's got to improve in some areas, and he's always going to have the height detriment. You know, that's a real thing. It's not like just people just made it up. Like, it is a real thing that he has to, you know, overcome. But you know, just all the things that he's done, the way he's played, I'm just not worried about at this point. I think, you know, having Jimmy Graham is going to be a big deal. You know, the offense is going to be better this year, probably, I think. You know, everyone's another year in to the system, and, you know, off season is going to be a big learning time for a lot of these guys. You know, perhaps, you know, Kristen Michael and Robert Turbin will be a bigger part of it. You know, perhaps Doug Baldwin and Jermaine Kearse will be better in this next season. You just, you know, there's so many variables that go into it.
Let me ask you to touch base on one other thing that I don't think we've talked about him on the podcast, at least not very much. But I was trying to think of other things that are, like, go on in this off season.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden I also looked down on my Twitter and I saw the number 51. And so I think it's kismet to say, like, Bruce Irvin has been, like, sort of popping up on Twitter a lot, you know, doing weird things. But absent of that, he's entering the year. This is his year that he's got to do something. Like, I think the players that the people that watch him every day and pay a lot of attention say, "Oh, this guy's really good," but he's not great. You know, he's not consistently, like, great. He's not, you know, we thought maybe we were getting a 15 sack guy, and then when that didn't happen right away, then they changed positions. Now he's this or that. What are your thoughts going into Bruce Irvin's, you know, make it or break it season?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think he's got a lot of room to improve, and they've been saying it for a couple of years now that this is, like, you know, he's really turned a corner and everything, and I'll believe it when I see it. But I think he did make a lot of strides last year in terms of the way he plays. I think one of my main concerns about him early on in his career was he wasn't super tenacious, and, you know, like, he's the kind of guy who'd, like, he's a pile watcher in terms of, like, when there's, like, a whole gang of guys tackling someone, he'll just be on the end, like, watching it happen. But I feel like towards the last part of the year, he was really, like, you know, he's, like, becoming, like, more of, like, a Bobby Wagner style tackler, where he's, like, coming in with a lot of force. He's really physical. You know, he's playing mean, and that's kind of the one thing that I was worried about early on that I'm much happier about as he played in the second half of the season. I think when you're tentative, I think a lot of it was he just didn't know what he was doing when he started doing the linebacker thing as much, and he was doing two things at once, so that took away from his pass rushing ability, and so he was balancing a lot in that sense, and I think that made him a little bit tentative, and that was part of the reason you saw that he wasn't to me, he wasn't as physical as I'd hoped he'd be in terms of being a strong side linebacker. Like, you want a guy who's kind of like an enforcer over there.
Yeah, I mean,
and he did change his pass rush, like, form, I guess. You see him, he's more, like, way down in, like, a 4-point stance now, and he kind of explodes off the ball. So I think, you know, he's done a lot better of a job of, you know, not just being a one-trick pony in terms of trying to get around the edge. Like, he's converting speed to power. He's trying to power through guys. They've used him on stunts more, and you know, I don't think he's going to be a 15-sack guy, at least not for the Seahawks, but neither are, you know, Cliff Averill and Michael Bennett. I think it's like a team. I think when you come to the Seahawks, really, they do a lot of, like team stuff, like stunts and, like, games, what they call it, where, you know, you, like, for instance, on one play, like, Michael Bennett is, like, he's the hook. You know, you got to, like, have two guys go after him, and that leaves Cliff Averill free on one guy, and so, like, they do a lot of that stuff, and they have a heavy rotation, or at least they did 2 years ago. Last year it wasn't quite as heavy, but
how excited are you to just find out what the defense is going to look like with another defensive coordinator?
Yeah, that'll be really interesting. You know, it's hard to know how much of a stamp Dan Quinn really put on things, whether that was his ideas or it's kind of Carroll with the directive. I personally don't think it's going to be a lot different. I think this is Carroll's defense. He's like the mastermind, and then he allows his defensive coordinators to do their own things and like put their spin on things and call the personnel and stuff like that. But I think it's going to be really similar in this next year, and I think Carroll's probably going to have a pretty heavy hand on some things, especially at the beginning of the year as things kind of get going. So I think it's probably going to be relatively similar, but obviously there's going to be some different personnel in there, and they're probably they're always evolving. I think
I'm so excited. Obviously there's levels, but how can you not be so excited that there's going to be perhaps 11 more Seahawks in like a month or whatever? That's crazy. And
plus you got guys like Cassius Marsh coming back who never really played last year.
I think Marsh was playing well in his opportunity. I think that Greg Scruggs played well in the past times when he's had opportunities. There could be guys, it'll be interesting, like what if Jesse Williams really is healthy or whatever.
Right.
There could be guys on this team right now that are going to be, like what we saw Jordan Hill do last year, but like it's going to be interesting. And then interesting also is just the fact that usually we expect those guys to come through the secondary, and now it's sort of just, it doesn't feel like the next secondary guy. We don't really feel like that guy is. We don't have a grasp on a guy stepping up there, but on the defensive line, it does seem sort of interesting. And then also KPL and the linebacker groups. But I think obviously in those 11 draft picks, you're going to get quite a few, probably offensive linemen, maybe a receiver. There's a lot of ways to go, but it should be interesting. Let's end the show with our first segment of Reel and the Field Gulls. This is the first time we're doing a segment. We're going to see how long we can keep it going. And then, do more segments in the future. So how this segment got its start was last week. We had
Eric Stoner
on the show, Adpo Jackson, and basically we were talking at one point about the proposed rules to get rid of extra points. And I feel like we said the words boring, and, and the next day after the podcast came out, John Ryan, punter of the Seahawks, tweeted out something. So, he was subtweeting somebody about. So you think that that the extra point is boring? I told Danny that obviously he's subtweeting us because he listens to the podcast, and I think, Danny, you don't believe that, right?
Well, I don't know. It's not that I don't believe it. It's that there's a lot of people saying the same thing. I think like everybody's kind of on the same page. Like, well, not everybody. There's a lot of people that are on the same page. Like, this is a boring play. Like, let's make it more interesting.
Right. Yeah, I think so.
So who knows if he was actually? He's probably a huge fan of the.
Probably. There have to be some people within the organization, be it players or coaches, that are like huge Seahawks fans, and that they listen, that they absorb all the content. I know Doug Baldwin absorbs a lot of it. He goes to the outreaches of the internet that we know of to read about what people are saying about him. So I would like to believe that John Ryan is listening right now. So this is a segment called Talking Directly to John Ryan. And I'll go. So basically all we do in this segment is just say something to John Ryan as if he's listening to the show. And I'll go first. And what I want to say, this is something that I said after the Packers game, a few days after. That pass was in the air 22 yards that you threw for a touchdown, John Ryan. It looked sort of at first when you threw that important touchdown, it looked kind of like, a little lob that might have went 5 yards. But then I measured it on the replay, and it was in the air for like 22 yards, which is considered a long pass. And it was on the money, and who cares what your face looked like? That was a really good pass, and I want to give credit where credit's due. Great pass, John Ryan. I hope you like the podcast. Danny, is there anything you want to say to John?
Yes, hi, John. Danny here. I would like to say I am very much excited to watch your segment on American Ninja Warrior. I don't think we've heard how well or terribly you did, but you look like you're in pretty good shape based on your Twitter pictures. But I am a huge fan of that show. I watched pretty much every episode. So, I'm really looking forward to that, and that's going to be fun.
That is exciting to have a Seahawk on one of your favorite shows.
Yeah, it is. Honestly, my wife and I binge watch that show like I can't even remember when, but we watched probably like 35, 40 episodes. Like,
Where can you watch it? Like, where can you binge
It was
watch
all on demand on our
Oh.
cable. I think it's like Spike TV or one of
'Cause
those like quote manly TV channels.
Yes, I mean, there's nothing more manly than Spike, but
I can't even remember. It's probably not Spike, but
I only know that people had talked about it for so long that eventually I went on YouTube just to see what a clip was, and it was like a clip of this girl that completed it or something like that.
yeah.
And
Oh
and
yeah,
it was-
Casey Catanzara. She's a superstar.
That's crazy to me. So it's like, that's the only thing I've ever seen. I did sort of cry when I watched it because I was like, they had made such a big deal out of it, and she was doing these crazy things that when she actually completed it, I felt emotions.
I get literally really into it. I'm actually thinking of quitting Field Gulls and just starting a blog about American Ninja Warrior. Not really, but it's really fun. You actually get really into it. It's like you start like sitting on the edge of your seat for these guys, and some of the women that are doing it are really, really good too.
Right.
It's crazy. It's actually Esquire Network. I just looked it up.
Yeah, everybody. That might be the problem, is that not only do I not have cable, I especially don't have the Esquire network.
Yeah.
Does that come in through an HD antenna? Because that's what I use.
I don't think so.
All right, so that was talking directly to John Ryan. Good pass, and good luck on American Ninja Warrior. We'll definitely have something on Field Gulls up once that airs. We want to thank Jackson again. That's at Jackson Bevins, Field Gulls writer. You can follow me at Kenneth Arthur S. And Danny?
At Field Gulls.
At Field Gulls, and also always read fieldgulls.com. And thank you for listening to Real in the Field Gulls podcast. We'll see you next week.
Word up.